Welcome to the free enterprise nation. Our economy consists of two major sectors, the private sector and the public sector. The private sector is about 5 million employers and 115 million employees. The public sector, our public servants, are about 87,000 different institutions who collectively employ 20 million people in government and in public education. We've seen our taxes go up and the government talk about huge deficits and the need for deficit spending going for another decade at least into the future. We know the cost of government and public education is high, but we really haven't been told why it's so high. One of the reasons that it is so high is because of the huge disparity that exists between pay and benefits that are provided to our public sector workers by those who pay the taxes from the private sector. Generally speaking, public sector workers get better pay, they get better benefits, they retire at a much higher pension than Social Security, and they retire earlier than Social Security. For example, the Bureau of Economic Affairs earlier this year released some statistics that were startling. They said that the average federal government worker compensation and benefits was over $119,000 a year, while the average private sector compensation and benefits were $59,000 a year. If you're an average taxpayer who paid income taxes last year, your average taxes were $10,000. That is, you paid $10,000 in income taxes last year. That's enough to pay one federal government worker for 1 month. The federal government has been extremely generous in its compensation to its own employees. On January 1 of this year, in the middle of one of the greatest recessions we've had in decades, if not in our history, the federal government gave a 2.9% raise to every federal worker, an average of $2,200 each, and they gave a 5.9% raise to every federal retiree, at a time that 8 million people are unemployed and the private sector is struggling just to exist. It isn't just the federal payrolls that are different than private sector payrolls. All government and public education sector workers tend to be higher than private sector. The Bureau of Economic Analysis says that the average public sector non-federal worker earns 29% more than the average private sector worker. We started some research back in March of this year to find out, does such pay disparity really exist, and if so, where and how? We found some statistics that are startling. We looked at one state, for example, and found out that there are teachers retiring at over $100,000 a year that have been working there for 30 or 35 years, and they get a guaranteed 3% raise every year after that. We found the highest paid driver's training teacher makes $170,000 a year, but there are a lot of others making over $100,000 a year. We found in California there are retirees from the California state retirement system that are retiring at $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year. The highest paid one retired at $500,000 a year. We saw in New York where city workers were working $100,000, $150,000 in overtime in their last year on the job in order to earn a pension that would be larger than their salary ever was while they were a full-time employee. There are hundreds of these examples on our website. When our researchers found them, they would exclaim, "Oh my gosh," or "Oh my." So we've actually labeled them, "Oh my." You can go to the first page of our website and read until you weep at the largesse of the public sector and how it has treated your hard-earned tax dollars at your expense. Now, there's a good reason to have early retirement for firefighters, law enforcement officers, and our military. They're our heroes. They're the people that live at high risk. They risk their lives and give their lives in service to us. We should retire them early and generously. We have to replenish the ranks with younger people, and it's absolutely smart public policy to reward these people. But it doesn't make much sense that we do that for every person who works in every government nationwide and every teacher who works for the public sector. That's just crazy. We're providing benefits to them that we can never have for ourselves. We can't afford them. Earlier in the 80s, the government recognized that we were going to have a real big problem with baby boomers. We had about 77 million people that were born between 1946 and 1961, and in 2011 they were going to reach age 65, and for the next 15 years about 5 million of them would retire every year. They knew there wasn't enough money there because Social Security has always been a transfer system. You would take money from the active worker and give it to the retiree, and that's how it has worked. But when they looked at the demographics, they said, you know, in 2011, that isn't going to be possible. We're not going to have enough workers to pay for all these retirees. So what they did is they raised payroll taxes on employers and employees, and they said we're going to pre-fund for this obligation. And during the next 25 years, they collected $2.5 trillion more than was needed to transfer from the workers to the retirees. They called it a Social Security Trust Fund. And supposedly in 2011, when baby boomers start retiring, $2.5 trillion is in the bank to help to pay for it. But they spent it all. There's nothing in the bank. The people who have been paying payroll taxes for the last 25 years have paid them twice. Once to pay for the people who retired before them, and another time to pay to build a reserve for their own retirement. They did that so that their children and their grandchildren wouldn't have to pay for their retirement. But the government took it all and spent it, and there's nothing but IOUs. And your grandchildren and your children and your great-grandchildren are going to have to pay for it. When government sees a shortfall in revenues, they always say, we've got an easy solution for that. We can cut services. What we'll do is we'll send your kids home earlier from school. We'll reduce the school year. We'll release prisoners from prison. We'll cut back on the number of police. They will cut down hours of operation. They'll close national parks. They will threaten to reduce the very services we hired them to provide in the first place. They will fire, if they must, their best and brightest and youngest teachers, the best and brightest and youngest firefighters, police, and other government workers, because they have to pay for this incalculably high cost of providing pensions and retirement benefits to their senior people that we just can't afford to provide. Everybody that has been in any position of authority in our government in the area of finance, government accounting offices, the Congressional Budget Office, the President of the United States himself, has said that the current government level of spending is unsustainable. That means it cannot continue. And yet, while they're saying it's unsustainable, what they're doing is adding another $1.5 trillion of deficit this year and talking about adding $9 or $10 trillion more of deficits in the next 10 years. Who do they think can pay this back? How do they think that anybody can pay this back? The answer is they don't know. We've got to stop them, and we can. There are 115 million workers in the private sector. There are 5 million companies in the private sector. Only 130 million people voted in the last election. If we unify our voices, we can change all of these public policies to those that we can live with. We've created an organization to do that. For the first time in America's history, we have a place that you can join your voices to the voices of others and speak in one voice so loud that every elected official will be forced to listen. It's called the Free Enterprise Nation, and we hope you join us. We need your support. Thank you.